Okay, guys, very welcome back to the show, and I am delighted to have Keith Elliot Greenberg back on the show. I believe this is the third time, but last time we got to have some nice cold beer in Dublin, and it was under
That's
much better
right.
circumstances.
Yeah, we got to do the interview from Dublin, and that
Yeah,
was quite a thrill for me.
yeah,
And
and
I
those people
believe
just
that,
kept walking in and out of that room.
yeah. Well, like we were saying off camera, you have to take the good and the bad. I mean, we had a nice room centrally located, blocks from my hotel. So I really didn't have much to go. And then we had a great time afterwards when we went out with your wife.
Yeah, yeah, that was last October, I believe, wasn't
It
it?
was October. It was right after the book came out, and it was
Yeah,
the tail end of the my promotional tour in the UK. And
yeah,
for those who
inside the
don't
rope.
know, the book is inside. Follow the Buzzards: Pro Wrestling in the Age of COVID-19. It came out in October. It's a profile of the COVID era in professional wrestling, and as well as a snapshot of what was going on in the world at the time. And I think it will be regarded as a document of historical significance in the future, or at least I hope
Yeah,
it will.
yeah, I think so. What's the response been like since we were last talking about the book?
I mean, it's mixed. I was doing one signing in Brooklyn, and one of the indie wrestlers said, "I'm not going to read a book about wrestling during COVID. I didn't wrestle during COVID, and it was the most depressing time of my life." And I'm like, "I'm with you, man. Like, I'm certainly don't want you to relive that." But it is weird reliving the COVID era, and I do think it's just like now you look at these books about the final days of, say, WCW, and you go back and you revisit that history. I think when we go back and we contemplate, what was it like to have a WrestleMania in the Performance Center in front of no fans? It's really quite surreal, and it almost seems like it didn't happen.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Doesn't it all just seem like one big mad dream, and now everything is just kind of back to normal? It's crazy, really, isn't it?
Yes, and before we went on, we were talking about your children, and I was in Los Angeles at one point, and a woman out there. I was working with a camera crew, and the wife was on the camera crew, and she had a child in the middle of COVID, and she said then she'll get together with a friend. And this is like a friend she hasn't seen since the pandemic. And it's almost like there's an edit from 2019 to now. And so it's as if she never was pregnant, never gave birth. It's as almost none of that happened. But when she goes home, there's evidence that that period happened because she has a child there.
It's bonkers, and we won't dwell too much on it. But like this book that I have in my hands right here, anyway, this was like pretty much all written as this was going on. And now
Yes.
we were talking about your new book that you're currently piecing together, and we'll
Well,
talk about the
just
process.
starting. I mean, I
Yeah.
just announced it last week.
But this is WrestleMania 3. So what made you step back from modern to way back to WrestleMania 3? Why that
That's
venture?
a really good question, and it's and it goes to my own psyche and the way I portray myself or like to brand myself. Because of my age, I have sometimes been hesitant to do books only about the past because people will look at me and say, "Well, you did a book with Ric Flair, you did a book with Freddie Blassie, you did a book with superstar Billy Graham," and if I'm writing about the past, then they'd say this guy's, he's a nostalgia act. He's, that's all he knows. But I've since done in recent years, I did a book in 2020, Too Sweet, Inside the Indie Wrestling Revolution. And now I just did the book about, Follow the Buzzards, about pro wrestling in the age of COVID-19. And I've been writing every month for Inside the Ropes magazine in the UK. And so I think I've established my bona fides as a modern voice. And I have to get over some of the paranoia that if I write about the past, people will say he's just an old man clinging to his romantic memories that probably aren't even 100% accurate of the past. And so during WrestleMania week this year, WrestleMania 39 in Los Angeles, I'd find myself every night in a bar. What a surprise. And, I would be talking. I was telling my sister this today, from, I'd say, Wednesday morning through WrestleMania weekend, through Monday Night Raw till Tuesday when I departed. I think I only spoke to wrestling people, like wrestling fans and wrestlers and people somehow connected to the wrestling business. And I would find myself in a bar every night and realize it was US West Coast time. So a show that would end, let's say, midnight in New York City would end at 9 p.m. in Los Angeles. So there was lots of time to go out. And we would talk about wrestling. We'd be talking about what matches did you watch, or what WrestleMania was your favorite. And then the question came up, which WrestleMania do you think was the most significant? And over again, I found myself going back to this concept. And I kept coming back to WrestleMania 3, because WrestleManias 1 and 2 were part of a fad. There was the rock and wrestling connection. And a lot of people didn't think WrestleMania would really become an institution. They thought there would be a few WrestleManias and then the world would move on to something else. And, WrestleMania 3, when it was in that massive American football stadium, it sent a signal to the world that WrestleMania was never going away, that WrestleMania would always be here. And it also forced WWE, or the WWF, to upgrade its production to accommodate, a live event, broadcast from a major stadium, not an arena, not a traditional wrestling arena. And, and also at that point, people were not really flying in for WrestleMania week, but you had people drive down from Canada, and you had people driving up from, say, Chicago to the Detroit area. So suddenly, WrestleMania was not just local to the people who happened to live in that market. It had wider reach. And of course, now when it's WrestleMania week, this year, I think there were probably, more than 30 other wrestling promotions putting on shows, along with wrestling themed comedy shows. There were live podcasts that people were going to. There was a WrestleCon going on over there. There were autograph signings. There were
festival, isn't it?
There were people doing Q&As, and it was a massive event that, of course, drew people from all over the world, and also draws promotions from all over the world. Progress from the UK was there. Tokyo Yoshi, the women's promotion, were there. They were all doing shows. I saw Kota Ibushi wrestle on a Game Changer wrestling show twice that week. And, that is what WrestleMania has evolved to. And I believe it all started with WrestleMania 3 in 1987.
Yeah. And of course, you joined the WWF and the magazine kind of things even pre-WrestleMania 1, wasn't it? You were there for the first.
It was the day of WrestleMania 1. That's when I was asked to join. I was at WrestleMania 1 covering WrestleMania 1 for Us Weekly, which still exists in the United States, entertainment magazine. And I was 26 at the time. But I was freelancing, and I got into a conversation with Ed Raschuti, who was the editor of the WWF Magazine. We were sitting next to each other. And, I say this a lot. Back then, it was a rarity for someone with a journalism degree who was a working journalist and understood who was equipped with actual journalism tools and had knowledge about the wider world to know a lot about professional wrestling. It was considered the domain of the unwashed masses. So I think Ed looked at me as something of a novelty. And he'd say, wow, we're not going to find another guy like this. And I guess many of the traditional wrestling writers he'd come across were just that. They were good people and they were knowledgeable about wrestling, but they might have been a little bit limited in both their writing and reporting abilities. And, in their, the length and breadth of their knowledge. And, Ed wanted to grab onto me. And I'm not saying this to put myself over, but I am, I'm speaking accurately. And he said, why don't you start writing for us? And so before I knew it, I was on retainer. And I remember going backstage in Poughkeepsie at a TV taping, and Vince McMahon knew me. He knew me as a fan. I'd been hanging around wrestling since I was a teenager. And so he probably knew me as, another fanatical fan from New York. And probably when I started writing about wrestling for other publications, which I was doing by the time I was about 22 years old, he's like, oh, another crazy, obsessive fan who's kind of gotten in and gotten an assignment. And now he gets to hang around with wrestlers. I've seen this before. And then he sees me backstage and he's like, he's looking like, why is he backstage? And Ed Raschuti runs over to him because Vince was quite accessible then, that you could just walk up to him. And he's like, no, he's working for us now. And Vince looked at me and smiled like, okay, welcome to the team. I guess the team's getting bigger. Even he's working for me now.
Yeah. And so have you been on location for every WrestleMania?
No, I have not. And,
okay.
There was a period, I was on retainer for the WWF magazines or the WWE magazines for 22 years. And then in 2007, right after my Superstar Billy Graham book came out, my retainer was taken away. And I knew it was going to happen because every year WWE would get, I wasn't an office guy. I was a freelancer, but I would get a monthly retainer. And if they needed 4 stories for the magazine, I would do that. If they needed 3 stories and they wanted part of their annual report written, I would do that. I would sometimes write public relations things for them. I was a writer on retainer for the WWE. And every year they would give me a raise. They would bump up the amount they paid me. And so after 22 years, that was a pretty substantial amount. And I remember thinking, there's no way that I'm going to be able to maintain this. At some point, somebody with some sense is going to look at the books and ask, why did this guy get paid this much last year? And lo and behold, a new publisher took over. And he's like, with all due respect, like, I've never met you once. You have never been to the office once. I'm like, yeah, I go on the road and then I write from home. And he's like, with the amount we're paying you, like, I can hire 2 recent college graduates and pay them less than you're getting paid right now. And it's like, I knew this day would happen. No hard feelings. And he said, I'll still throw you some freelance work, which to this day, I'll occasionally get a call from WWE to do something. So my relationship with them never ended. That said, when I lost my retainer, it was the assignments were fewer and farther between. And so I did feel a bit left out. And I can remember there was one WrestleMania I was on assignment, and I don't even remember who I was working for. It might have been the television show A Current Affair. and which had been on American television, had been canceled, and this was the second iteration of A Current Affair. And I was flying to Chicago, I recall, and I got to the airport, and it was WrestleMania weekend, and I saw George Napolitano, the photographer who lives in Brooklyn, getting out of a taxi and walking into the airport with his camera gear to go to WrestleMania, and I felt like crying. I felt so left out. There were numerous WrestleManias that I missed, and even when I was working for the company, there was some WrestleManias I did not attend. But since the WrestleMania in New Orleans, I believe WrestleMania 34. I think I've been to every WrestleMania I could attend, except, of course, for WrestleMania 36, because that was on a closed soundstage.
Mm-hmm. And so what you're telling me then as well is you were working from home for WWE Magazine before that was even a thing.
Yes, I wasn't even a hybrid employee. I was an absentee employee when it came to office stuff. When I came to the office, it was basically coming in to just hang out. I'd come in, I'd see my friends who worked for the magazine. I'd, say hello to the photographers, and I'd work out in the gym, and I'd go back to New York.
Yeah. In terms of the book, then, you're in the very early stages of this, and I know you're kind of looking for people within the business that may have been there at the time and looking for their recollections. So what exactly are you looking for from people?
Well, I'm not just interested in WWE. I'm interested in what was going on throughout the industry at the time. So if you were working in the Memphis territory, and you felt, the long arm of Vince, in your dressing room, poaching your best talent, that had to be a little bit alarming. I mean, maybe you were mixed. Maybe you felt hopeful that you'd get selected. Maybe you felt deeply resentful that this thing that you loved, the territory wrestling where kayfabe was maintained, was being tampered with, and the gentlemen's agreements from the last couple of for the last generation were now being obliterated and disrespected. But that's what I'm curious to know. Because I had heard somewhere that Cowboy Bill Watts, who had an excellent promotion in Oklahoma, out of Bixby, Oklahoma, where he ran it. He, I believe, from what I've heard, and I'm trying to get a hold of him, saw WrestleMania 3 from that football stadium, and he was like, "That's it. I'm out." And so that's what was going on in the industry. And that's also the story I want to tell, because it was such a significant time in the wrestling industry. It established WrestleMania as an institution, but it was a year that was redefining the industry. I mean, and I'm not getting everyone in it. I have it written down somewhere, but I didn't bring my notes to the computer with me. In that year, WWE debuted Demolition. They debuted The Ultimate Warrior. Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty appeared for the first time. The $1 Million Man came in 1987. And Hacksaw Jim Duggan came in 1987. So that was a significant year. And Vince wasn't showing any sign of slowing down. He had been acquiring the best talent in each territory, for several years now, as he was, putting each one out of business. And now he was even more aggressive. He was hyper aggressive. And so, what was it like to not be invited to the party? When I was writing for WWE and things were booming then, I'm like, wow, for once in my life, I'm playing for the winning team. But what was it like to be on the losing team?
And how long do you reckon this project is going to take you? It depends, I suppose.
About a year. It usually that's usually, because I work other jobs, and I do other projects, and so I give myself time. I'm going through the interviewing process now with people, and also the booking process. And I'm still trying to track people down. Eventually, I'll get to fans who were there. Right now, I'm trying to get to both um, wrestlers from that era, and I'm also looking to get to people who had various positions backstage, uh, both the WWE's photographers at the time, Steve Taylor and Tom Buchanan, who had a pretty close view of things. Both
Yeah.
from a standpoint of just being up close with all the major players, being at ringside for every major event, and watching the operation expand because they're photographers, so they're dependent on the lighting. They're aware of the new equipment that was coming in. They would hear about it when there were problems, with the engineering in a TV production. And so I'll be speaking to them on this weekend. And I spoke to Nelson Swegler, who was, I think, vice president of television at the time. And I believe he's in his 80s and he's still thriving. I mean, the guy's still working, going on the road all the time. He's no longer with WWE. But, he was able to explain from a television perspective how WrestleMania 3 was different and the mistakes that were made during WrestleMania 2. And I'm fascinated. I'm riveted by this stuff.
Yeah, funny you mentioned Tom Buchanan. He puts up some absolutely crazy historical pieces and documents that he has. And he is coming on the show. I was talking to him maybe
He's a great guy.
in around for the last year, but he's very hesitant about doing the interview. He doesn't want to do it on camera. I said, that's cool.
Tom Buchanan lives by his terms. And, you have to respect him because, I know that, he posts every week on Facebook.
Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, he saved everything. He saved all his calendars. He saved all his passes. And he writes about what exactly was transpiring, both with his job and what was going on within the company, both on camera and behind the scenes. And, I know of one publisher who actually wanted him to publish a book with them. And he would rather publish his book on Facebook. He, like now, he's not a photographer anymore. He teaches snowboarding during the wintertime and skiing. And that's the life he's chosen to live. He is his own man. And, I understand, like me, I get called to be in a WWE documentary. I'm like telling everyone I know I'm going to be on TV. Tom Buchanan, he doesn't want to be in anybody's documentary. He wants to go snowboarding. And so God love him.
Yeah, he's a really cool guy. And he is coming on the show maybe within the next couple of months anyway. I don't want to hassle him.
I will say something about him, which I would say to his face, obviously it's a compliment. It was very important to Tom Buchanan that if he was going to invest so much of his life in WWE, that the storylines in the end would come out on the side of good. He didn't want to be promoting a product where there was a bad message being passed along. And look, I think sometimes he struggled with that decision. But he can talk about that.
Yeah, there's lots to get through in terms of that. And I'm just wondering, currently, I'm just going to bring up a few things. WWE went to Puerto Rico last week. Massive success. Can you see that being a kind of a fixture in the calendar from now on?
No, I think it will be a periodic stop. It was such a big thing, such a novelty to have them doing a show of that magnitude down there that, why kill it all? Like, why don't you could wait a couple of years and come back again and blow everybody away like they did. They also, the timing was right. I mean, Bad Bunny is at his peak of fame. And, Bad Bunny, of all the great celebrities in this world, he can wrestle really well. So when do the stars, and when do the stars align like that? So you have the number one pop star in at least Latin America, and arguably, not in the world, but among the top pop stars, current pop stars in the world, wrestling in Puerto Rico, where he's from. And, that's a rarity. And in some ways, you look at the early WrestleManias, you can make some parallel there because,
Yeah.
this is
Mr.
something
T.
that's coming up too. When Vince would have these early WrestleManias, he would not get just people who had some name recognition. He got A-list stars to participate in WrestleMania. And with Bad Bunny, that's A-list. And so this is, again, it's the same branding that started with the first WrestleMania.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Are you coming over to the UK for Money in the Bank? My only hang up with that is
I don't see how I can't. I have
such a small arena.
But I don't see how. No, don't see how I cannot. Just so many people I know are going to be there. As you know, I write for Inside the Ropes magazine there in the UK, so it's another opportunity to hang with those guys. You'll probably be there. I'll get to hang.
Unfortunately, this is where the bad news is. I have a family wedding on the day of Money in the Bank, and then get this, for AEW in Wembley Stadium. I had pre-booked a wedding with a guy that I know from last year that I'm actually going to be DJing at his wedding on that night. So I'm going to miss the two big pay-per-views in the UK this year, but I will be in Philadelphia next year to make up for it.
Oh well. There'll be, it won't be, it won't be the last time we'll hang out. We'll be hanging out again. So yeah.
What do you think of AEW going for Wembley? Huge
I think
move,
it's fantastic. And
Yeah.
this has also come up in relation to WrestleMania 3. Like, I was on Busted Open Radio and Tommy Dreamer said, like, will there be a book about this, about All In Wembley Stadium one day? Will that be the turning point in AEW's history? Certainly, I did not realize that the momentum for AEW was still building at this pace. I thought the honeymoon period, to a degree, had ended because, at first it seemed like AEW could do no wrong all through the pandemic. And this is in my book, Follow the Buzzards. Even when there were mistakes made, fans seemed to be very forgiving of them. And there seemed to be a lot of positivity there because guys who did not like or were tired of the WWE system, the Vince McMahon run system, as opposed to the Triple H system, were jumping to AEW, and Tony Khan was hiring them, and that was generating a lot of excitement. And then Triple H took over the creative end, and Triple H has been, quite prolific, I think, in that capacity. And, all the stuff many of us loved about the blue and gold brand of NXT, we're now seeing repeated in WWE, but more so because it's a larger stage. And then you had that backstage scrum incident, the notorious incident with the Elite and with CM Punk. And
what do you think about all that stuff, Keith? Do you think,
what can I say? I mean, I've been around the wrestling business a long time. In another era, there'd be a backstage altercation. Everybody would kiss and make up, or not kiss and make up, and and that would be that. No one would be talking about it. No one would be thinking about it, except for the wrestlers who would give them something to gossip about for a few days. That's what used to happen. So
what I always say to people is, like, look at Brett and Vince and the way they made up. Like, it's nowhere near that level.
Yeah, it's nothing at that level, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think the animosity is close to the level of Brett and Sean in those days either. So certainly they can resolve it, or at least work together. At the same time, so some guys had a beef backstage. I mean, you're working together. Everybody's, striving for a top spot. There is competition there. There's personalities that aren't going to mesh. And, they're big, strong guys who know how to fight. So, there's always been backstage fights. I witnessed the famous fight between Jacques Rougeau and Dynamite Kid in Indiana. That was a lot more severe than the stuff I've read about after the scrum. So I don't make much of it. However, in this age where everyone's on Twitter, it embarrassed AEW, and people also turned on Tony Khan a bit. And the shows are good. I mean, I have no complaints. I mean, I'm going to be watching AEW tonight with my friends, and I'm looking. I always look forward to watching AEW. In terms of a consistent wrestling product, they have it. I like WWE these days, and I like AEW these days, and one is not to the exclusion of the other.
Yeah, there seems to be that kind of thing online where people say, I prefer this one. Just enjoy wrestling.
And I've met folks like that. And I actually wrote about it in Inside the Ropes. There's a bar I go to in Brooklyn called DDT. It's a wrestling themed bar. And, there's a guy who comes in, and we call him Mustache John. And, if we're watching a AEW show and then someone puts on WWE, he's like, turn that off. It's like, you can enjoy both. We can watch GCW afterwards. We can watch, old matches from Japan. Why can't we watch current things from WWE as well? But I was surprised that the momentum was such that they could sell 60,000 tickets so quickly.
Yeah, the way you have to remember it over here is like there'll be people coming from Ireland. There'll be people coming from all over Europe to this thing. And I think it's actually more clever to do one big show than maybe chance and do like 10,000 arenas for maybe 6 or 7 nights. I think this actually makes more sense because it's pretty accessible. Europe is to London, really. I think there'll be people coming from Holland, Germany, Belgium, France, all these places, Italy, even all these places that WWE had over the years as well.
You get on EasyJet or Ryanair, boom. I mean, I was doing a book in London once, and this was in 2017, and it was about rock and roll murders, or deaths that were that some people theorized might have been murders. And there's a theory that Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones didn't just drown on his own, that he had help drowning. And Brian Jones' girlfriend from the time was living in Stockholm, and she's a former model. And I finally got a hold of her, and she said, well, I never talk about this. Of course, if you happen to be in Stockholm, and I was in London, and I looked up Ryanair, and it was, I think, $14 one way. I go, I'll be in Stockholm Saturday morning. See you then.
Yeah. I know a few guys that have booked over for Wembley already, and I think the flights from Ireland to London take about 40 minutes, 50 minutes maybe, and it's €20 at the moment. So,
exactly, yeah. If you want to be adventurous, you take the ferry like the immigrants did from Dublin to Liverpool, and then work your way down. Probably be more expensive to do it that way once you calculate in the train.
Yeah, it probably would. And the thing about the Wembley thing is, though, the rumor is that they're going to have possibly, now I don't know what you think about this, Sting versus Goldberg for Sting's retirement match, and possibly Bill's as well. I'm not sure.
I mean,
and then
I was hoping for MJF against Goldberg, but who would do the job? I guess it would have to be Goldberg.
Yeah, and then of course, if the Punk stuff can be ironed out as well, there's an
It'll be ironed out.
It will be ironed out, but like there is potential there. Like I wouldn't be surprised if it did completely sell out. Now, a lot of people were writing it off before it even.
Yes, they were. And so let me ask you, because you live on that side of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
How do you explain the success we've seen so far
for AEW?
Yes.
I suppose just an alternative, but I will say it's nowhere near as big outside of America, I think, as a whole. But I think I think with Wembley Stadium, I think you're not just bringing people in from England. If it was just a stadium, or not a stadium, an arena show, maybe.
Well, maybe even if it was in Fulham, at the Fulham FC stadium, I think it might feel a little more limited.
Mm-hmm. But I think the whole reason why he went for Wembley was, like, they've been talking about going to England. This is my theory on it, my own personal theory. They've been talking about going to England for a long time. Then WWE comes in and like, boom, we're doing Money in the Bank. So obviously, I think their plan was to do Craven Cottage, and then he maybe thought, oh well, they're after getting in before us. Fuck it, I'm going to do Wembley.
Right, they did Clash at the Castle, which was a great show. I wished I'd been there, because it was such a fun show to watch. On paper. On we get the Peacock network here. You guys have the WWE network, which as a consumer I preferred, but I'm not leaving New York because you have the WWE network over there. Although it does feel like an enticement. Right?
And cold pints of Carlsberg. But I think he was trying to do a bit of one-upsmanship with the Wembley.
Perhaps. But trying one-upsmanship can sometimes blow up in your face. I mean, I remember, AAA, the Mexican promotion, they were going to do a show Madison Square Garden, and they ended up in the much smaller Paramount Theater joining Madison Square Garden, but it was it was scaled down. It was not anything that was a threat to WWE. In fact, I'd say most American wrestling fans were barely aware of it. I think they did a joint show with Impact. Now, the folks who went to the show said in terms of wrestling quality, it was as good as a show you'd see anywhere. But, I think, I applaud Tony Khan for being able to take some blows and coming back and not quitting and showing maybe a little bit of what he's made of. And it's like, you want to like make fun of this guy. You want to create memes about him. Well, look what he's doing. I'm not doing it. And the people criticizing him aren't doing it. And we also don't have the resources, but it's not just the resources. It's the moxie that he's showing. And I admire it. And it reminds me a bit of the Vince McMahon I knew when I first started working for WWE in the mid-'80s.
Yeah. What did you think of, we'll wrap this up soon, but what did you think of the whole, another fence that people thought could never be mended, the CM Punk thing, and then he was backstage at Raw hanging out with a few guys a few weeks ago?
People are allowed to evolve. I mean, when I was writing a book with Ric Flair that came out in 2004, he was upset with me at one point because he felt I was too close with Mick Foley and Bret Hart, who were two people he really disdained. And when he had his retirement match last summer in Nashville, they were seated in the front row as his dear friends. And so, you're allowed to make peace with people. You're allowed to reconcile with people. You're allowed to, have a bad breakup with a female, and then you run into each other 2 years later. And while you might not get back together, you might understand each other a little better and appreciate the time you've had. So, what's the big deal? He's backstage. Maybe in an emotional way, he's at a healthier point of his life, and I hope that's true.
Yeah. I'd still like to see him get one more run. WWE will have to wait and see what happens with that. But just while we're wrapping up, where is the best place for people to get copies of this and all the rest of your book?
Well, I would have said go to your local bookstore when the book came out. But, some of those bookstores only had 2 or 3 copies available. So I would just say, go to Amazon, go to Amazon, UK, or if you're listening in the US or Canada, just go to Amazon and they'll have copies. And if people then want me to autograph the books, all they have to do is contact me on social media. And I'm easy to find on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. And, if you send me the book on a self-addressed posted envelope, so I could send it back to you. I'm happy to sign it to whoever you like, and I'll send it back.
And people here in Ireland go to Amazon.de, which is Germany, to avoid Brexit charges.
Is that so? Well, that's quite resourceful, and they should, because
it's crazy. It's
you're
crazy.
part of the EU. So why should you be subjected to the charges in the UK? Another way that the Irish are being oppressed by the crown once again.
I think they secretly enjoy ordering from Germany anyway. Another big rival of the UK.
Yeah.
But we love them really. We love them really.
Yeah, even though the royals are actually German themselves.
A story for another day.
Yes, a story for another day. Yeah.
Thanks a million, man, for your time again.
Oh, it's great. I love hanging out with you and talking to you.
Cheers, Matt.